Hello, hello. Today we're going to be discussing the two major political parties that emerged during the Reconstruction era. So the first one being the radical Republicans. They're going to control a majority of the national government during the Reconstruction era. So therefore, they're able to implement Reconstruction policies that they want. So what are the things the radical Republicans want to do during the Reconstruction era? Well, one of their primary concerns is helping freed slaves adjust to living free and successful lives in the United States after they're freed from slavery. Okay. The Southern Democrats, they do not want to spend as much of our national government's money helping the former slaves adjust to living free and successful lives in the United States. And the goal of both political parties during this time, both the radical Republicans and the Southern Democrats, they want to rebuild the United States, especially those areas in the South where a majority of the fighting took place during the Civil War. And they want to rebuild America so that it comes back stronger than it's ever been. Okay. And the United States is going to emerge out of the Reconstruction era stronger than it's ever been. Okay, but one of their first objectives is to rebuild the southern cities that were destroyed during the Civil War. Okay, so if you remember, major cities in the South like Richmond and Atlanta, Georgia, they were completely destroyed due to the fighting that occurred during the Civil War. So you have cities like Richmond, Virginia, that have a lot of buildings that look like this because they were burned down when the Union captured them. So during class, you're going to answer each of these questions in Pear Deck. So you'll describe what you see in this photograph. Okay. And just to remind you where a majority of the fighting took place, it's going to take place in this area here in red in the southern part of the United States, specifically in the Washington, D.C. and the Richmond area. That's where a lot of battles take place, like the Battle of Manassas. And then there's just a small amount of fighting in the north that occurs in areas like Gettysburg and southern Pennsylvania. So the north does not have near as much to rebuild during the Reconstruction era as the South does. Okay. And like I said, one of our national government's major goals during this era is to rebuild all those cities and towns where battles took place in the South. Okay. So just some more review information. Remember, the American Civil War was fought between the United States and the Confederate States of America from 1861 to 1865. Remember, both sides had disagreements about slavery, and that's going to be a central source of the increasing political unrest and disunity in the country that led to the war. And these disagreements largely followed sectional lines. Many white Southerners, both slaveholding and not, supported slavery, while many Northerners opposed slavery. And we know the Union, or the Northerners, are going to emerge victorious in the war, and they're going to defeat the Confederate States of America. So you see another photograph of Richmond here, taken in 1865, right at the end of the Civil War. So you see many cities in the South are in ruins, and they look like the city of Richmond. So there's a great need to rebuild these cities. And the problem is there's disagreements between those two major political parties who control the national government during this time. Right? The radical Republicans, they want to do things one way. They want to supply government aid to rebuild these cities, and they also want to spend a lot of money helping freed African Americans adjust to living free and successful lives in the United States. Now, the Southern Democrats, they're going to want to spend a majority of the national government's money on rebuilding these cities. And they're not going to want to spend a lot of money, or near as much as the radical Republicans are spending, on helping African Americans adjust to free life in America. Okay, so who's left to deal with this problem? Well, President Abraham Lincoln is left to deal with it at the beginning of the Reconstruction era. However, he's going to be killed by John Wilkes Booth just 5 days after Robert E. Lee is going to surrender to officially mark the end of the Civil War. Andrew Johnson, Lincoln's vice president, is going to be left to deal with the problem after that. Now, important to note that Abraham Lincoln had radical Republican beliefs, but his vice president, Andrew Johnson, associated himself with the Southern Democrats. Okay, so a totally different party than Lincoln was a part of. Andrew Johnson is going to become the new president when Lincoln is assassinated, because that is the rule of law that the Constitution has put into place. Okay, so once a president is assassinated, or a president can no longer hold the office of a president because they've been impeached or they've died, it's the vice president's job, according to the Constitution, to step in and become president. So Johnson, like I said, he's going to be associated with a different political party than Abraham Lincoln, right? And that it rarely happens nowadays that a vice president associates with a different political party than our president does. But during this time, that was the case. Johnson's going to be a Southern Democrat, but compared to Northern Republicans, he was relatively sympathetic to Southern states. So a lot of the Northern Republicans, or the radical Republicans, they weren't very sympathetic to Southern states. They wanted to punish the Southern states for what they did during the Civil War. They wanted to punish them for seceding from the United States. Okay, but Andrew Johnson, as a Southern Democrat, he's not going to want to punish the South at all. Okay, so he's going to prevent the Northern Republicans from passing a lot of policies that could be seen to be punishing the South. So Johnson, because he believes in different views than a majority of Congress, because he's from a different political party than a majority of Congress is, he's going to face a lot of opposition in how he wants to handle the Reconstruction of the United States. And many of the Republicans, they're going to oppose what Johnson wants to do. Okay? And these Republicans in the North were considered radicals because they wanted extreme changes in society. Okay? They wanted to supply a great deal of help to the freed African Americans to help them lead free and successful lives after the Civil War was over, after slavery was officially banned in the United States. And the radical Republicans are also going to want to punch the South for the Civil War. They're going to support equal rights for freedmen, also known as freed slaves. Okay, so here are the major questions we're going to focus on answering during today's discussion. Here they are. First one being, how should the South be rebuilt? How should the states that seceded be brought back into the Union successfully and peacefully? And how should former slaves be incorporated into the country as freed men and freed women? Okay, how can the United States government kind of help them to adjust to free life? Okay, then we're going to read some primary sources where we hear from some radical Republicans during the Reconstruction era and some Southern Democrats. And then we're going to complete a response to the question of whether or not we think the radical Republican plan for Reconstruction was considered to be radical. Okay, so we'll have to explain why we think the radical Republican plan for Reconstruction was considered radical in our writing response today. All right. And that will be it for our discussion video today. I will see you again next week. Have a great week.